Hello and welcome to our Revealed Reality Bible Study. Our present series is from the Gospel of John. I'm Reverend Art B. Carter Jr. and I will serve as your host and your facilitator for this series. Before we get started in tonight's session or today's session, please go to my website at www.wtfo.biz. That's www.wt as in Tom, fo.biz. www.wtfo.biz. And click on the Revealed Reality Bible Study link on the bottom left-hand corner of the home page, and that link will lead you to the resources that are available for this study. The resources include PDF files that you can view online, or you can download, or you can print them off. The resources also include video files that accompany each session in the series. Again, this is the Revealed Reality Bible Study series on the Gospel of John. Tonight, we will review part 1A, and we will also then launch into part 1B. I'm Reverend Art B. Carter Jr., and I'll serve as your host and your facilitator. Let's review part 1A. We ask that we attempt, before we even read the written text, that we attempt to take off the lenses through which we traditionally view Scripture, particularly New Testament Scriptures. Why? Because the traditions that have been handed down to us and that we take for granted were not established until 300 years after the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And so some of the Christian formulas and doctrines, such as the two natures of Jesus Christ, fully human and fully divine, the Scriptures don't actually say that. All right, the Gospel of John begins to build that foundation block, but still doesn't spell it out. Those things were not spelled out until 300 years after the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus. So what we want to do before we even read the written text of John, we want to take off those lenses. And once we take those lenses off, we want to put on different lenses. We want to put on John's lenses. How did John actually see Jesus? We want to put on the lenses of John's audience. How did John see Jesus through how did John's audience see Jesus through what John presented in his Gospels? And we want to put on the lenses of the text. What is the text actually saying? Not what we traditionally have believed it says, but what's it saying? So some important goals. We want to bridge the gap between what we've heard and what John actually says. And we want to bridge the gap between what we think John is saying based upon our modern interpretation. And we want to actually read what he says. Now, last week we answered some questions. The first question we attempted to answer was, what? What are the Gospels? The Gospels are the first four books in the Christian Bible, the New Testament: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And each of these Gospels tell stories about the life of Jesus. Only one of these Gospels claims to be an eyewitness account. Remember, the writer of the Gospel, Luke, says, I didn't see these things myself or witness these things. I gathered up all of the oral and written information that was available about Jesus, and I put them in one text. Well, the author of the Gospel of John says, no, I'm an eyewitness to what has been written. So that led us to the question of who wrote the Gospel of John. Well, many scholars throughout the ages and Christian believers today believe that it was the disciple John who walked and talked and ministered with Jesus. Ultimately, we cannot say with pure authenticity that it was the disciple John, because we know the gospel circulated in Christian communities in oral form for many years and then in written form for many years without even having names attached. They were already circulating in written form before names were added. Now, does this really make a difference? Well, it doesn't to me. It doesn't matter to me whether it was a disciple John or whether it was another John. What makes a difference to me is the message that the author is intending for us to receive. I personally believe that it could have been a Palestinian Jew named John, because John was a very common name, who definitely had some first-hand knowledge. So I could go with it being the disciple John or another person named John. Don't matter to me, because my faith is not in the author, but in the message. We also explored the question when. When was it written? Scholars have long considered John to have been written near the end of the first century of the Common Era, so around 90 AD, which would have been almost 60 years after the death, the burial, and the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now, before we get into today's lesson, Part 1B, let's just take a quick break and we'll come right back.